Right, everybody. It's just gone past 11 o'clock, so I think, although we're still waiting for a few people, so hopefully we will start the webinar. So welcome again to CIRIA webinar introduction to non-licensed work on asbestos and soils online e-learning. Just before we start, there's a few sort of housekeeping rules. Yeah, the next slide, please. So this is a webinar, and I just want to explain how this will work. The webinar will be recorded and will be available after the event for delegates. In order to obviously get this webinars to happen smoothly, we will mute everybody during the presentation. However, if you want to ask questions, there's a question box on the control panel that you can type the question in, and we'll try to answer the questions after the presentation. So anyway, so as I said, today's webinars will be talking about this brand new training on non-licensed work for asbestos in soil, and obviously we're very fortunate today that we have main author Nathanail from GHD to tell us a bit more, because he's obviously responsible to write most of them. So over to you, Paul.
Joanne, many thanks for that introduction. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for taking time out on a Wednesday morning. I'm not sure what you were doing yesterday, but I was out on site yesterday in Storm Francis. And today in Nottingham, it's nice and sunny, and I'm indoors, so I'm doing something wrong. However, if you're interested in fractured rocks and their openness, being out on site in intense rainfall is a great way to see whether rock is draining or not. Joanne, are you all right? I can hear you in the background. Okay. Hanifa, I need control of the slides, please, if I may. There we go. So as well as thanking you for giving up your time, I think as a sector, we should be very grateful to CIRIA, and in this case to Joanne in particular, for the enormous effort that goes into identifying project needs and then raising the financial resources to then deliver those. Like any CIRIA project, this e-training was supported by a project steering group, ably chaired by Claire Dickinson, who's chaired a number of projects that I've been involved in. So huge thanks to the PSG. The training was developed by Land Quality Management, by LQM, and the materials were developed by Richard Ogden, Andy Gillett, Judith Nathanail, and myself. And I'd also like to thank people who gave me permission to use images, particularly Steve Edgar from Vertays and James McFarlane from Hydrock, because they responded at the very last minute. I needed a couple of images that would just do the trick, and they were particularly speedy at responding. So thank you, gents. And to Alex Wilkinson, who runs a small professional video company in the Colin Campbell building where LQM is based. And it's the first time I've worked with a professional video outfit. And they did the videos of Richard putting on and taking off PPE and RPE. Great job. And it's particularly poignant today to acknowledge the funding of the Construction Industry Training Board, the CITB. Those of you working in the core of construction will be aware that CITB raises a levy on construction companies, and obviously over the lockdown, as construction stopped and then recently, at least in part, restarted, CITB finances have taken a huge hit, and today there is talk about a huge number of redundancies within CITB. So just again, another acknowledgement there of the hard work that the CITB has done for this sector, and we wish them well. I spent a considerable amount of time yesterday evening driving back from the northwest in heavy rain and strong winds, listening to the radio to pass away the time. And a lot of the debate was about cladding and the regulations changing in January and the consequences on people who are now faced with owning or having leases on flats that have a zero valuation. And this is obviously the consequences of lessons learnt, at least in part, from the Grenfell Tower fire 3 years ago. Asbestos has been regulated for a long, long time. One of the famous legal cases that we talk about in CIRIA C733, the judge there talks about the harmful effects of asbestos being known well before 1924. On this slide, we see the asbestos industry regs dating from 1931, a range of other regulations, and then right at the bottom and on the right-hand side, the control of asbestos regulations 2012. That really is the driver for the e-training that we developed for CIRIA. So I'm going to have a look at CAR 2012. The control of asbestos regulations there are 35 regulations within the CAR. The one I want to particularly focus on that led to the training is Regulation 10, Requirement for Information, Instruction and Training, or IIT, if you want to get into the lingo. We will talk about the importance of deciding whether work is licensed or non-licensed. And just a reminder that the control of asbestos regulations are there to prevent exposure to asbestos, and if exposure really is unavoidable, to reduce it. And I'll come back to this at the very end. The use of PPE, personal protective equipment, including respiratory protective equipment, really is a matter of last resort. What you want to do is to be designing the work so that there is no exposure and using control measures to prevent the fibers of asbestos becoming airborne and therefore potentially being inhaled. So that gives you a snapshot of the regulations. Accompanying the regulations is an approved code of practice written by the Health and Safety Executive. An approved code of practice includes practical advice on how to comply with the law. It's advice, it's not instructions. You can use other ways in order to comply with the law. But if something happens and you didn't follow the ACOP, then you need to show in some other way that you complied with the law nevertheless. Otherwise, you'll be in trouble in court. Now, that's just a general definition of an ACOP. And in this case, the law that we are talking about is the Control of Asbestos Regulations 2012. And so that approved code of practice, L143, it's available as a free PDF. It's structured in a particular way. It includes the legislation, so the regulations. It includes the advice that the HSE wants to give us, and then it provides more general guidance and signposting to other documents that might be of use as well. It's focused on asbestos-containing soils, on working with asbestos in soil, made ground, demolition, debris, and so on. And there is no legal definition of what is an asbestos-containing soil. The phrase is analogous to asbestos-containing materials, or ACMs, but instead of the cement or the insulating board or whatever it happens to be, in this case, the material that contains asbestos is soil. So a straight dictionary definition is just soil that contains asbestos. Okay, that then begs the question of, well, what's a soil? And that includes natural soils that you would find out on site, topsoils, subsoils, and so on. It includes anthropogenic, man-made soils, made ground or fill. A more broader reading would include construction materials, demolition arisings, buried caches of wastes. So we now know what asbestos-containing soils are. We now know what soils are. Well, what does containing mean? Well, that means that it's got fragments of ACMs or indeed free asbestos. There are some key questions that anybody working in the ground needs to consider. The first one is the activity, is the work with asbestos? And if it is, then it has to be done under the control of asbestos regulations. And if it isn't, then it doesn't get done under the CAR 2012 provisions. If it is work with asbestos, then the next question to answer is, well, is it work that is licensable? Is it work that needs to have a license through the Health and Safety Executive? If it isn't, then the question then becomes one of, okay, you don't need a license, but do you need to notify the Health and Safety Executive? And if it is notifiable, then it is notifiable but non-licensed work, NLW. If it's not licensed and it doesn't need to be notified, then it's non-licensed work, NLW. And the front page of the CAR 2012 regulations deliberately placed underneath the line where the question, is it work with asbestos, kicks in. Now that question is answerable using a variety of documents, but there is a really helpful flowchart in the ACOP that I was talking to you about a few minutes ago. So Regulation 10 places a duty on employers to deliver information, instruction, and training, IIT. Who needs that? Well, it's either people who are liable to disturb asbestos as they go about their work, or their supervisors. And that information, instruction, and training is there for a purpose. It's there to ensure that the work that is done is being done safely, and that both the workers themselves and other people, which could be other workers or it could indeed be the general public, are protected as well. So that's the requirements of information, instruction, and training that Regulation 10 requires. This is Regulation 10, and I'm going to spend a couple of minutes unpacking it because it's very important that employers know the extent of their responsibility. And an employer in this case is both the company employing somebody, but also the client employing a company to do some work for them. So every employer has to ensure that any employee is given adequate information, instruction, and training where the employees are either being or liable to be exposed to asbestos, or if they're supervising people like that. What do they need to know? They need to have an awareness of, and then there are 11 things listed here. And these are the sorts of topics that you might go through relatively quickly in an asbestos awareness course. And then the e-training that we develop goes much deeper into each of these 11 topics. A reminder of the properties of asbestos, the fact that it's the release of fibers and the inhalation of those fibers that can trigger, in extreme cases, asbestosis, or over cumulative exposure, lung cancer or mesothelioma. A reminder that for lung cancer, smoking is added to the risk, and for mesothelioma, the age of first exposure and childhood exposure becomes important as well. The nature of where we find asbestos, what kind of manufactured materials and products contain asbestos, and then what do we do that could result in asbestos exposure. And when we know that, what we can do to prevent such exposure. Now remember, one of the regulations talks about the need of preventing exposure. That's the background of or behind many of the things that we'll be looking at. It's about making sure that work practices are thought through and designed to be safe, that where necessary, control measures are put in place. Now, that could be enclosures, it could be damping down the soil, and then the right use of protective equipment of different scales in order to make that last line of defense secure. There is a reminder of the range of different respiratory protective equipment, RPE. And over the last 6 months, I think it's fair to say that we've seen an enormous increase in the awareness and the knowledge of different types of respiratory protective equipment by the general public. And indeed, the news this morning is that the government in England, the national government has decided that secondary schools in England will be wearing face coverings, at least in part of their time at school come next week. So in terms of RPE, a reminder of what their purpose is, how you choose the RPE to use, its limitations, one of which, of course, is impaired performance. Those of us who have been wearing face masks or face coverings for COVID protection purposes will be very aware that they do drain your energy much more than being able to breathe freely. Nevertheless, they need to be used properly, otherwise they don't deliver the protection, and they need to be maintained if they are to continue to function and stop us breathing in airborne fibers. A reminder of what emergency procedures are, and emergency procedures could be a breakdown in the control measures, a breach of PPE, or indeed a separate medical emergency, somebody collapsing, somebody fainting, that the consequences of which are accentuated because of the presence of asbestos and the fact that the person might well be working with asbestos. Again, something that we've all become very, very used to, the need for good hygiene requirements and making sure that we don't take asbestos back away from the site, back home, how to decontaminate ourselves and the equipment that we're using properly, how to handle asbestos waste properly, and again, an issue that has gained enormous notoriety, enormous local social concern in recent years. For notifiable and for licensed work, there are specific medical examination requirements that need to be complied with. And then a reminder of what the control limit is and when and how air monitoring has a role to play. So all that is Regulation 10, Part 1A. Pause, draw breath. I'm actually going to have a sip of my coffee. And then Part B is that employee that is receiving the information, instruction, and training is able to carry out their job in a way that can be done safely and effectively. So there are two parts to this. The ACOP requires, the approved code of practice, HSE L143, requires a training needs analysis. And I've broken that TNA, that training needs analysis, into 5 steps. There is generic training that is needed pretty much by anybody working with asbestos in soil. And then there will be organization-specific training that is needed about how a company deals with asbestos in soil. What kind of work do they do? And then there will be project-specific training. It's a site investigation. It's constructing a piling mat. it's remediation involving the excavation and off-site disposal. So there'll be project specific. Then there will be role specific training. It could be that I am the operator of the excavator, or I am the supervisor, or I am the foreman, or I am the design engineer. So I need to know what my role is and how that role contributes to compliance with the CAR 2012 requirements. And then there is task specific training. How do I use the equipment that I have been issued for that task, given my role at that project, in light of the way that my organization does things? The CIRIA e-training that we've developed is directly aimed at providing that generic training that everybody needs. And it recognizes that there is still the need for organization, project, role, and task-specific training. So the online training that we've developed for CIRIA is broken up into 23 modules. There is an introductory module, a training on how to do the training, if you will. And then there is material for each of that list of Regulation 10 requirements. And then at the end of it all, there is an assessment, a test, an exam, if you will, which you pass or fail. Just now, just at the beginning of getting this e-training up and running, we also have a pre-course assessment, and that doesn't count, but it allows us to see the improvement, hopefully, in scores that people get before and after doing the training. But that's what you're letting yourself in for if you register and do the training. The material comprises videos, handouts of the slides, and then pointers on additional reading for every module. And then we've got 3 elements of the video. The first is literally a quick skim through all the slides, 1 or 2 seconds per slide, no voiceover, no animation, nothing, just showing you what's coming next. It's as if you'd sat down with a printout of the slides and you just flicked through the material just to see what's coming. Then for each of the slides, there is voiceover, a bit like I'm doing now. You've got the slide in front of you and I'm talking you over it. And then we've got some videos that are showing you how to put on and take off personal protective equipment, including disposable and reusable respiratory protective equipment, and how to decontaminate yourself, and how to then bag that up as asbestos waste. The slide handouts are quite simply a PDF of the slides that you're seeing, and then the additional reading is tailored to each of the modules. Very often it points you to the ACOP L143. It may point you to the HSE Asbestos Essentials website. It may point you to the CAR soil guidance produced by the Joint Industry Working Group. It may point you to some of the other CIRIA documents on asbestos in soil. Oops, jump 2 slides. So the e-training is aimed at the non-licensed work for asbestos in soil. So that's both notifiable and non-licensed, NLW and NLW. It focuses on people working in the ground, so soils, made ground, aggregate, demolition arisings, and it provides the generic information that may be identified as being needed by your training needs analysis. We only deal with non-licensed work. So if you're facing the prospect of doing licensable work, then this training doesn't go far enough for you. And the e-training covers the provisions of the control of asbestos regulations, which are really about making sure that the health and safety aspects of work are being covered. You need to go elsewhere. C733 will be an obvious starting point on how to investigate, sample, assess, and remediate asbestos-containing soils, or ACS, as I've got it on this slide. So here this gives you a structure of the e-training, and you can see the Regulation 10 requirements on the left, and then the modules on the right. Module 1 and 2 are introductory modules on the control of asbestos regulations and so on, and then you can see the rest of the sequence there. We haven't gone through the topics numerically, so if you go back to the CAR Regulation 10 list, that's the sequence in which they're in, but we haven't followed that sequence in the module provision. We've taken hopefully a more logical approach. And you can see that some topics have required more material to be prepared. So safe working practices and the use of personal protective equipment, we've taken 3 modules. I did think quite hard about whether to put this slide in here. As you go through the training and you've watched the video, you've looked through the slides, you have the chance to reflect and answer some formative questions, just to confirm that you've kind of got the right end of the stick, and that allows you to take things one step at a time. The old truism, how do you eat an elephant? Well, you can only eat it one bite at a time. But at the end, there is a requirement that your knowledge, the fact that you received this information, instruction, and training has been effective, is documented and demonstrated through an assessed test, which, if you pass, will then give you a dated, named certificate. Not only that you've attended the course, but that you've successfully completed it. In the unlikely event that you fail first time, you're allowed one free reattempt. And what you should do with the PDF that gets sent to you is that you, as the individual, should retain that certificate and pass a copy on to your employer, because they need to be able to demonstrate that they have given their employees the required information, instruction, and training. And that may also be needed by their clients when they are bidding for work. So my final slide before we go to questions, the context of the control of asbestos regulations is health and safety at work. And health and safety is our collective responsibility, whether you're the managing director or the person driving the excavator. We each have a personal responsibility to ourselves and to our colleagues and to the general public. A training needs analysis is an essential requirement by the ACOP, and that will help you identify the range of training that your team might need. And the e-training that we've developed for CIRIA provides that generic information, instruction, and training that would then need to be supported by organizational, project, role, and task-specific training. Don't forget the other hazards on a post-industrial brownfield site or a construction site. The physical hazards, the trips, the slips, the falls, and of course the other chemical hazards, the volatiles, the heavy metals, and so on. And don't think that the control of asbestos regulations, which are a risk-based approach to health and safety, is identical to the risk assessments that we might be used to for planning or for Part 2A purposes. Different skill sets, different information bases needed, and you need to recall that. And my final reminder is that preventing exposure by the choice of ways of doing the work and then the use of control measures is really where you should be at. And the role of PPE and RPE is really as a last resort. It's the thing you do at the very end as a bit of extra safety and security. It's not your starting point. So with that, that's my final slide. And I'm hoping that Joanne will take over the questioning. And this is your chance to type questions into the chat box. And hopefully I will try and answer them for you.
Practical element, whatever that means. So I know you have videos in the e-train to demonstrate how you put on RPE, etc. But how can we actually learn how to use RPE properly?
Okay, so one of the things that somebody needs to know how to do when they're going to be doing non-licensed work, notifiable or not, is how to use a respirator. That process involves, if you're going out onto a site and you're being issued with a respirator, you should be shown how to use that particular make and model of respirator, and it should be fitted to your face. So that fit to face process is an essential requirement before you can go out on site. And at that point, that's the opportunity to be given practical knowledge and training on how to put on a respirator, with the test confirming that you've got the right seal and that you're not inhaling external air without it going through the filter. When we began this e-training pre-COVID, that was recognized as a limitation. I cannot online deliver that kind of physical training. The issue now in a post-COVID world, of course, is that virtually all the live face-to-face training has been suspended. So, and that's not just asbestos in soil, pretty much everything. So now we're in a situation where you still need people to be given that information, instruction, and training, but without the ability to go and do it in a room. And so now we're faced with, we're having to do stuff online, but that doesn't remove the need for me being shown how to use the respirator I've been issued with, and for that to be fitted to my face and tested that it works effectively. So COVID has kind of changed the environment within which e-training such as this would need to be delivered. It doesn't water down the requirement. It just reminds us that there is another stage before you let somebody go and work on a site where work with asbestos is involved.
Right, thank you, Paul. I believe I've seen, obviously, there are, just to remind everybody that on the e-training, there are sort of further readings and places where you can get background information, etc., etc. Is that right, Paul?
Yep. So each module ends with a further reading stroke reference list of things that we've cited. Yep.
That's what I thought.
But if you want to keep up to date with other things that are going on in asbestos world, you can subscribe to the HSE bulletin. That will give you generic asbestos news. Often that will be either updates to guidance or maybe a prosecution that's gone through, and it's always interesting to see what's led to a prosecution. You can think, okay, I'll make sure I don't make that mistake. Then specifically within asbestos in soil, the email alerts from CIRIA, the LinkedIn group on contaminated land that I run, for example, the JISC email forum that I run, again, people post things there of relevance, not just on asbestos in soil, but on pretty much anything. And again, if anybody wants any links, any information, either the JISC forum or the LinkedIn group, again, just get in touch.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. I think that's very important because, as probably most of you will know, probably in the past 6-7 years, there have been more guidance developed for asbestos in soil from various organisations, CIRIA, SOBRA, JIG, etc., etc. I think it may be for some people difficult to know exactly where things are, especially most up-to-date documents, I think that will be useful. I think this is the problem is, you know, the e-training is obviously done in a particular time, opening time. So new things may not, you know, then if there's a new case law or whatever, it has to include it on it. So I think, you know, a good HSE website or a good CIRIA will be a good source of information. Anybody else? Any guys been very quiet? Yeah. No question. You're all very stunned about how wonderful the e-training is, I'm sure. Right, so just before sort of we finish, perhaps I should just tell you a bit more.
Joanne, I've got a question to you.
Oh, of course, yep.
Okay, so I recognise that my team need to be to do the training, and I've got 3 members of my team. Can I go and register all 3 of them at the same time, or do they need to register individually? How does that process work? How does the mechanics of that process work?
It has to be, you have to register one by one on our website, which I'm going to explain to you in a minute. There is 2 ways. I mean, I'm sure you can email us and then we can register for you. But because the Limos, which is the e-platform we've done the training on, is automation. So somebody have to type in somebody's email.
That's the point, isn't
on
it?
That website. Yeah. Well, we can do it for you.
Assessment at the end needs to be personal.
That's
to
right.
The
so
training. That's
that
the reason
person exactly have to log on and then do the training, and the CPD will be sent to that person's email address. So, you know, if you get your PA to register using your PA email address, it doesn't work. It has to be the training, the delegates, the people actually doing the training. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, just to explain a bit more, go to the next slide. You still on control, Paul?
I think
just
I
a
am.
couple of slides. Yeah. So this is just So this is what the e-training will look like. As you can see, the first one is the open page. The second, the bottom slide, is what will you see when you click on. And as you can see, the different modules, I don't know how clearly you can see, it's on the left-hand column. And the first one I open is the pre-training test. So this is quite special because I don't think a lot of training will actually give people an idea how much they actually retained after the course. So basically, we have this so that people do a test before and do a test afterwards, so that, you know, we will hopefully have some assessment how much you have learned from going through those 23 modules. So that this is quite special. Next slide, please. And as I said, I'm sure a lot of you have already got my email in the last week or so to say to you that, you know, the now, of course, the e-training is now available on CIRIA website, and this is a link that you can go to purchase the course. And as I said, I think once that you purchase it, we will send you a password, or Limos will contact you, I suppose. And what is even better is because this course is subsidized by CITB. So if you're a CIRIA member, CIRIA LECO Broome member, local authority members, or Brownfield Risk Management Forum members, and CITB levy payers, you will get a discount of over £50. So at the moment, we're still trying to work out with CITB that how you can actually claim some grants from them as well. So if you are CITB levy payers and you're interested in subscribing to the course, if you email me, that'd be great. So we can definitely we can arrange for you to pay a cheaper price, but I think you can also claim whatever relevant grant from CITB as well. And also, just I don't know if I'm not sure if you know, but doing the course will also mean that you've got 7 CPD hours. Okay, so that's my contact at the bottom. So that's the last thing I want to say. Obviously, you're all very impressed with the course, and you're all going to go back and subscribe to it, right? Okay. Let me see what else can I need to say. So
So Joanne, people will get access to the recording and a copy of the slides. Is that
Yes,
right?
yes. As I said, people who has attended this course will get the recorded webinars and the presentation. So anybody else who got any questions? Paul, have you got anything to add?
No, other than recent experience shows that, how can I put this? Knowing what you're doing and the training goes some way to delivering that does have big paybacks. Understanding the regulations, understanding the process of deciding whether work is licensable or non-licensable and so on, and being able to interpret data well enough to make those decisions. When you're actually on a construction site, the financial implications of doing it right versus doing it wrong are big. So I just encourage people to engage with the training and be confident that they know what they're doing.
Yeah, and I just want to add, I mean, obviously it's a legal requirement that under Regulation 10 that you do need training when you do non-licensed work. Since March, a lot of people are working from home. E-training is a very good platform or mechanism for people to learn and train. And obviously people got more time as well at home, so that's probably easier for a lot of people. You could argue that perhaps, maybe because of the slowdown in the construction industry, you may not be working on site, or you might not be working on site, therefore not a lot, with asbestos in it much. But I think we all heard about, the government is trying to restart construction industry. Boris Johnson's ideas about build. So I'm sure, and I have seen construction projects started more in the recent weeks. So we'll be going on site very soon. So you need training legally, as I said, to equip yourself to go on site in the nearest future, or else you are breaking the law. So I think it's very important that you sort of use your time better now to get trained, and then when you actually go on site, you'll be a lot better and comply with the law. So that's all I'm going to say. So anyway, any more questions? So anyway, thank you very much for listening today, and of course, special thankful Paul to give us an overview of the e-training. As I said, if you have any additional questions for CIRIA or Paul, you will be more than welcome to either email myself or contact CIRIA. So I hope you have enjoyed the webinars.